What's up, Chargers fans? Welcome into the Guilty as Charged podcast. Today, as I always like to do, I try to bring on people that are smarter than me because there are many people who are. I love bringing on guests who know and are so passionate about something so specific. So I'm bringing on Kyle, who wrote an article, Understanding Compensatory Picks and Their Role in Roster Building. He wrote that for Bulls from the Blue. I wanted to talk to him about it because it is one heck of a piece. Kyle, thanks for joining me, man. How are you doing?
Oh, thanks for having me, Tyler. And I don't know, too much about that whole people smarter than you. I certainly wouldn't say that. I might have one little niche that I really like to focus on and wrote an article on, but I'm here today to talk about it.
Yeah, it was pretty darn good, and I read through the whole thing. It's been a while since I have read through it, but it was just so impressive, so well done. It does remind me a lot of when I kind of approached Arjun last year about bringing him on for analytics, because he just had this way of explaining the data and talking about the data, and I loved it. So I saw this and it looked so much like that. I'm like, I got to get this guy on. This guy has did a fantastic job. So we're going to talk about it here, the compensatory pick, something that Chargers fans maybe aren't very familiar with. I'm certainly not very familiar with them. Let's get into it. This is going to be basically your show from here on out. If I have any questions, I'll fire them in. Otherwise, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Tyler. Are you doing the slides or am I here?
You are doing the slides. I have it up here for you, and you can click on through.
Killer. Thanks, Tyler. This is about understanding compensatory picks. And it's kind of a funny topic because for Charger fans, a lot of us have never really heard about these or really talk about them too much. That's part of Tom Telesco's management. He's had a different sort of strategy. And we also haven't had the deepest roster in the past that has allowed us to really maximize it. We've had a great, upper level of, great starting roster, but we retain and develop talent with, but we haven't had guys that we've let walk and sign elsewhere that have netted us some compensatory picks. And we're going to go over what that looks like, how we could change that up a little bit, what we've done in the past that's prevented us from doing that, how we can change it in the future and start improving in that sense. So I'm really excited to get into this with you, Tyler.
Let's do it.
So to start, this is unprompted. Tyler doesn't know this is coming his way, but I'd like you to give this trade a grade, Tyler. On April 2nd, the Dolphins and Patriots agreed to terms. The Patriots went and got Devontae Parker. They gave away a third and got Devontae Parker and a fifth in return. And the third was for next year. So what do you think about that trade?
So yeah, that would have been a second rounder this year, a third rounder next year. If they're 2023, Patriots get their 22 fifth rounder. It's been a while since I looked at this. I couldn't tell you much about how Devontae Parker has performed recently. I'm surprised they did get a fifth round for him, only get up a third. I will say I'm generally in favor. This is not really related to the content of the trade, but I'm generally in favor of just drafting a wide receiver. I don't know about Devontae Parker as much. So I will just say it looks like everyone got what they wanted. A B-.
Okay, a B-. So next year's third, this year they get a fifth, and they get Devontae. What if we looked at it from another perspective, and I told you that New England may have given away a third rounder next year, but it might instigate a snowball effect of them getting a fifth round this year, Devontae Parker this year. Next year, it'll help them gain an additional sixth in 2004 or 2024 of extra fourth rounder, and in 25 an extra fourth. So what would you grade that kind of trade?
If I'm just grading the Patriots side of things, that seems like a slam dunk. As long as everything works out, of course. Looks like an A to me. That looks pretty good.
Yeah, I'd be pretty stoked if I was the Patriots. And believe it or not, if you look at a lot of the trades the Patriots make, on paper, like that first trade we were looking at, they might look, decent, C, B. But if you follow why they're making these trades and the actual overall effect they have on the roster building, they habitually make trades that look like this. And we'll get into at the end of the presentation, once we've learned about compensatory picks, how I got to these extra picks that we've added on.
Okay. Can't wait.
So obviously we need a quick refresher. Like we said, some Charger fans might have no idea what compensatory picks are because we never get them. The first one, it seemed like that had an impact was when Phillip Rivers left. And I think some of us may have put up like an effective blocker because we were so sad about losing Rivers. We were like, we don't even want to think about what that possibly got us. But basically the compensatory picks You can look on Over the Cap. They do a great job of breaking everything down, and they're often a resource I go to track this kind of stuff. But the basic synopsis is if you let players walk and they sign elsewhere, you are eligible to receive a pick in return. And the way they measure that is by making a chart that tracks all the players that you've brought in and then all the players that you've let go. And if you have a surplus of players that you've let go, you're then eligible for picks that are in relation to how much they signed for. And it's on a very interesting thing for me is it's on an average per year basis and not necessarily the entire contract. So if you have players that are even a little older, like if they're getting to that 30 or 31 age bracket where, they're not getting those long contracts anymore, but they still signed for 10 years, that counts the same as somebody that signed 5 years for 50 mil. So it's something to think about when you're trying to target players to sign to help with your compensatory formula down the road. The other interesting thing is there's a specific time window of when these free agents affect the formula. It's only from the start of the new year to the Monday following the draft. That was kind of hard to find because there was always dates given every year, but I was able to find it's the date. It's in the CBA. It's the date following the draft, or the Monday following the draft. So outside of that, all of a sudden you're free to go and spend again and have it not affect this formula. So that's why you see another wave of signings right after the draft because teams are then able to, spend without any repercussions in a sense, other than what it does to their cap space.
Good, great. Just for my clarification, what is the start of the league new year? Just so we have that window.
Oh gosh. It's the date that I don't know how they break it down. I think it was like the third week in March this year. It was when we have that 3-day pre-tampering period.
Okay. I think it was the 13th then this year, but okay. So free agency.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Exactly. The 3 days of the pre-tampering is before the league year, but when free agency starts, that's what signifies the new year. So it's that window, mid-March to first Monday of May, probably. Is your window to sign. So let's look at Bill Belichick, because besides from drafting the greatest player ever in the 6th round, which coincidentally was a compensatory pick. I don't know if you knew that, but that was a compensatory pick. So if we want to sidetrack from facts like we're doing right now and go to theories, maybe Bill drafted the greatest quarterback ever in the compensatory round and then decided these are the compensatory picks, or these compensatory picks are something I need to prioritize building around. Who knows? Mm-hmm. But whatever the case may be, in the 22 seasons that Bill has been the Patriots coach, manager, whatever you want to call him, overlord, he's gotten 42 extra draft picks. So that's a pretty substantial amount of roster power, building power. And they haven't even been just heavily favored to the 6th or 7th round. You have 9 thirds, 4 fourths, 5 fifths, 15 sixths, and 9 sevenths. Something I didn't mention before that I probably should have is the compensatory picks do start at the back end of the 3rd round. And those are for players like Phillip that were leaving for a lot of money. And it trickles all the way down to the back end of the 7th. And you typically have to sign, in today's dollars, obviously this will change down the road, but around $2 million a year to affect the formula, to get a 7th. Like Josh Harris is not going to affect the formula for us because he signed for 1.4. So that's almost 2 extra picks per draft. And if you roll that into understanding that rookies have a 4-year contract, you're looking at 6 to 8 players, assuming you don't cut any of them, extra drafted players on your roster at any given time. That's preventing you from rolling out, granted, maybe an undrafted free agent does great in training camp and takes away a roster spot from somebody that was drafted, or just one of those last roster spots where he does come in and make an impact. That's preventing the Patriots from rolling out, Trey Marshall, Vaughn Campbell did okay in some cases, but some major liability spots that are on our roster, Patriots don't typically have those. And they also have guys that are killing it on special teams. And that's because that's where a lot of these guys are getting drafted. And when you have this surplus of picks, you can kind of see how, if our depth is a lot stronger now, and we're able to have these in-camp battles that actually result in players earning a spot as opposed to being given a spot. When these guys, these extra picks are going to go and sign somewhere else and then bring us, extra draft capital down the road. It's a self-perpetuating cycle in a sense.
Incredible.
Yeah.
42 picks. I don't know what the number is for Telesco. I'm going to assume it's under 10. I don't recall what the number is.
Oh gosh. Yes, oh man, I had this in my notes and it's in the article, but before 2019, he only had like 3 or 4 or 5. It was very low.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was 7 because he had, I'll have to look that up. I'm sorry, Tyler.
I don't know the answer either. You can make something up and be like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, that's right.
It's in my article. He effectively got less picks in a 7-year window than we've seen the Rams get in 1 year, I think. So I think it was 3 or 4 picks, which is crazy. It's very weak. But then in the last couple of years, we did get more. We had Phillip gain us a third. Last year we had 1 or 2, and this year we have we have the 2 6s or 3 6s, I think, and a 7.
1 6 3 7s.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Last year it was Wade where Tyrod was supposed to give us a 6th and do a lot better, and then thanks to his injury and Mills doing well, it got bumped down to a 7. But that was a bummer. But the Patriots have done an amazing job at capitalizing on this, and we'll get into the Rams as well. But staying on the Patriots for one more second, this is another trade that they made, and a part of Bill really, I call it manipulating the formula, because that's what he's doing. He's making trades that are on just another like just whole other wavelength, like level that some of these other coaches are. It reminds me of, I think it was that Jets game where Bill was taking advantage of the rules in some way and knew if his guys committed that penalty, clock when and he's just sitting there laughing. Like I picture Bill making these trades and just sitting there laughing and just going, how do these guys not realize that I'm just fleecing them? And then he lets his dog come up in the first round and finish a draft. It's great. It's awesome. It's good TV. So in 2018, the Patriots traded a 3rd rounder and received a 5th rounder. This was the same year. He didn't push it to the next year like he did before, but received a 5th rounder and Trent Brown. A lot of times people are apprehensive to trading for players that are in their contract years because they're like, well, you're just gonna have to re-sign that guy anyway. But Bill looks at it in a totally different way. He says, well, if I trade this guy for draft capital right now, and I bring in a guy that's going to fill a clear starting void, if I let him walk and he does what I believe he's going to do, because I have Tom Brady behind the center and he's going to make any offensive lineman look good, I'm going to get a draft pick back for this guy. So it's almost like I'm borrowing a draft pick from now. I'm going to get it back later. And in the process, I'm going to get a Pro Bowl starter on a team that won the Super Bowl. I mean, that's brilliance in my mind.
Just laying it out here. I always look at it, and I think Chargers fans or any fans look at it as, well, we get this guy this year, or let this guy go this year, what's the comp pick next year? But seeing him do this like that, trade, and then wait down the line, get a more valuable pick later on, and have the Pro Bowl starter, it's just amazing. It's brilliant, like you said. Like he's manipulating, he's laughing at everyone. It's pretty impressive. Now, what he does with those picks is a whole other story, but him getting these picks is fantastic.
Yeah, and that's totally fair as well. And actually, when we get into the Rams, you'll see that they often trade and manipulate them in another way. But if you look at this strategy, compare it to what the position the Chargers are in right now. Yes, we could go out and draft a right tackle, but we're assuming that right tackle does what we want him to do. It fills in that starting role. Like hopefully, who Penning maybe comes in and is just an adequate starter and slowly develops. I'm of the mindset a player can develop in his rookie year on the bench and in rotation. He can come in and get a game or two and get just a lot of time on the roster, developing with the coaching staff and not hinder his development for next year. And overall, you're not going to be, if you're just thinking specifically compensatory picks, you're missing an opportunity to bring in somebody that, just like Trent Brown, just comes in for 1 year, fills in, and then gets you a compensatory pick while that drafted player is even on your roster. So this could give us an opportunity to draft a 4th rounder, 5th rounder right tackle that we can develop for a year, like maybe a Max Mitchell or something like that.
Sure.
And we're not really losing anything in that sense, but we're potentially gaining a great starter now that we don't have to develop, and then a future compensatory pick down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you're getting into it, but how did you feel about the Khalil Mack trade then with that same, because he's obviously not in a contractor. You have 3 more years, I believe, to his deal. How did you feel about that in general, especially when trades don't count against the comp formula, right?
Correct. And it's basically how, if you look at Bill's offseason this year, it's probably confusing. I should probably say the Patriots offseason because there is a Bills team, but this is not a show about the Bills today. If you look at how Bill typically brings in free agents or brings in talent and how he did it this year, he went out and traded for a cornerback because he wanted to fill in a cornerback. In doing so, he didn't affect his comp formula. He went out and traded for a wide receiver, didn't affect his comp formula. Okay. But he knows he only has 2 leaving. We're giving him a 3rd essentially by signing JC Jackson, but somebody was going to do that.
Sure.
And he lost a center. I think his name's Karras or however you say his name. I forget. He signed for $6 million a year. He's netting them a 6. So if Bill had signed a wide receiver for, like, let's say he went after Will Fuller instead of went for this trade, he would have knocked out that 6th round pick he's going to receive next year. Gotcha. So that's kind of the brilliance in him going out and seeking out a trade instead of signing somebody that's available, which is probably what most fans typically look for. Now, last year was an aberration, and we'll go over that in just a second.
Yeah.
Here it is, Belichick's roster building model. This is just my theory here. I have not talked to Bill about this, but this is just what I see in his habits. Yeah. When he sees a position of need, he doesn't rely on the draft typically to go and fill it. He trades for it. He might sign players outside of the compensatory window, or he might go and sign somebody that's really cheap and it won't really matter. But he typically refrains from signing within that compensatory free agent window. He allows star players or below to sign elsewhere. He regularly kind of has a core of 4 or 5 players on both sides of the ball that are culture guys that can bring people in, help them succeed, and basically make the play around them better so that other players can come in and sign elsewhere. I mean, it was no mystery for a long time that players were coming to the Patriots on short deals to outperform their previous valuations and then go and sign somewhere else for big money. And then they flounder and everyone's just like, how are the Patriots doing this? And it's like, well, it's right in front of you if you look for it. Yeah. And then lastly, identify when you won't receive compensatory picks and attack free agency aggressively. So this is a model of really projecting out over the next 3 or 4 years what your roster is going to look like. And in 1 year, signing all the free agents that you think you're going to need in this window and staggering their contracts and so they expire in different years to try to gain as many compensatory picks as possible over that time. You only gain a max of 4 picks. That doesn't include special compensatory picks if the minority coach goes and signs somewhere else, or if you hire a minority coach, that gets tacked on top of it. That's why the Rams have 5 this year instead of 4. But that's basically what we saw Bill do last year. For the first time ever, at least that I can remember, Bill spent a record amount of money within the first day of the new year, right? And all of the contracts were staggered in different years. And that wasn't an accident. It was a very strategic method of building up his roster so that these players are continuously netting him a return in each offseason.
Wow. I know we're going to talk about the Rams in a bit too, but just, is there a kind of bell curve here? Or is it literally just like the Patriots and maybe some other teams, and then everybody else just doesn't know how to figure it out yet?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say it has to be executed by a GM and a coach that are on the same page, right? Which we've questioned for years and years past if we've had that with the Chargers. And it seems like we do right now, which is great. You have to have a coach, even though, and we'll talk about this too, I don't see it as a way of mortgaging your future, but you don't necessarily see a return on the compensatory picks until 2 years after you've kind of put the plan in place, right? Like if we're planning now for how our roster is going to look next offseason and who we're going to be letting go, then we're going to get picks the following year in 2024. So in a league where a lot of GMs are probably concerned about, whether how hot their seat is, whether or not they have a built-in trust and rapport with the owner and the coach, you need to have that kind of communication, be effectively utilizing this. And I don't believe the majority of teams really have that. So yeah, if you look at Snead and McVay, they have that.
Oh yeah.
Like they are absolutely working hand in hand. We're seeing that with Tom and Staley right now. And I know you guys recently talked about, is Tom's seat kind of hot? And I think we all agree probably isn't. I know you guys were saying that because while he's got Herbie on this rookie contract, he's got this guaranteed window. So he and Staley need to, I would like him, if this could be an open letter to Tom, please take this, deliver it to Dean, tell him there's no way he can, renegotiate with you, let you go or anything like that for the next couple of years, because you're going to implement this and you're going to be seeing a net return in picks and roster depth in no time. So that would be my dream and goal. But there's 32 picks given out. So Tyler, like naturally, if one team is getting 4, 3, 2 of those, there are teams that are just not utilizing it. So I'd say probably if teams are aggressively getting 2 or more picks, you're probably only looking at 5 to 8, maybe 10 teams that have a history of getting these comp picks. Wow. Or it might just be 3 or 4 or 5, and the rest are just kind of, luck of the draw each year.
An accident, basically, just somebody happens to leave, like Rivers. Okay.
Yeah. Or a roster rebuild like what we just went through.
Right.
I don't think Dan Feeney, Sam Tevy, and Tyrod from last year were like a part of a compensatory pick model. They were the house is on fire. We need to rebuild.
Right.
So hopefully Tom and Staley can institute something like this. It does take confidence, obviously. So getting to the Rams, in the 6 years of the McVay-Snead partnership, they've actually netted 14. So they are actually outpacing Bill Belichick right now and how many picks they're bringing in per year. They're over 2. And they're actually weighted heavily in the third rounders. So they are killing it. If you actually track the year before McVay came into the picture, the Rams traded up like most of their draft picks and leverage over the 2000. I believe it was, when was that? It was 2015, maybe. It was whatever the year Goff was. They traded up to get Goff, and it was an unholy amount of draft capital to go get him. And it actually leveraged their next year and hurt them in that sense. But they did retain some compensatory picks. They weren't drafting in the first round, but they still drafted 3 players in the later rounds. Everett, Cooper that was drafted, although he's still on the team and is a Super Bowl MVP. I think that's a win. John Johnson, and then one other player that netted them 3 picks down the road. And that's kind of when their cycle got started. So that would be, in my mind, they're a great example of a team that's utilized this effectively. And the funniest part of this to me is they're doing this while never drafting in the first round. They have still not drafted in the first round since the McVay and Snead partnership. And they still every year have above the average amount of picks. They're averaging over 8 picks, which if you actually, like I mentioned, 32 picks are added into the pool as compensatory picks a year. So the average amount of picks, if you spread it across all the teams, would be 8, right? Instead of 7.
Gotcha.
So they are every year at or above. In one year, they were actually at 11. So it blows my mind. And it's a self-perpetuating cycle for them.
Yeah, I mean, I am definitely quick to jump the gun and say, well, you traded for Stafford or you traded for Odell Beckham Jr. or whatever, Von Miller, and you're mortgaging your future, But then like their future looks pretty good. Like they're smart. It's such smart investments. And like you pointed out, 7 third rounders was the Belichick era for 22 years was 9, I think, third rounders.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I mean, just fantastic stuff. Just amazing.
And the Von Miller trade, right, was a 2nd and a 3rd. So they brought in Vaughn, a 2nd and a 3rd. People were judging the trade off that. Vaughn came and helped them win a Super Bowl, signed for huge money with the Bills. He's probably going to net them a third next year.
Oh gosh. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
the contract was huge.
Yeah. It just keeps cycling for them. So it's a very, when I discovered this for the first time, and I think it was the Trent Brown trade, I just started going, you got to be kidding me. Like, this has got to be something everybody needs to learn how to do. Well, not everybody, just the Chargers, but we'll see. So where do we stack? This is,
oh boy.
here's the answer to your question, Tyler. Sorry. I'm glad I had it written down somewhere. In Tom Telesco's first 7 years as GM, we only netted 2 compensatory picks. A 5th in 2016 and a 7th in 2018. And that depresses me quite a bit. And you got to ask yourself why. And I know when I was first following Tom, before I was in this compensatory pick mindset, I used to love the way Tom wrote contracts because it felt like they didn't expose us to players falling off a cliff. But, by having most of the guaranteed money up front, and then just spiking their cap hit in the last year and having a little bit of a cap penalty, a little bit of dead cap, but gives us the flexibility to move on from them. Prime example, Casey Hayward last year, right?
Yeah.
And what did Casey do? Well, we cut him. We still paid him some dead cap. We let him go to the Raiders. He signed with the Falcons this year for 2 years, $11 million. He just netted the Raiders a compensatory pick. So it's
neat.
Yeah. Awesome. So trying to get away from heavily backloading these contracts with little dead money, I think is important. We've shown in the past a complacency with, I call it roster holes. Tom might call it an area where we're developing in-house talent. we can have a separate discussion on whether that's valid or not, and some apprehension towards trading to fill starter needs. So back to Mac, I'm sorry, we got sidetracked on that. I was thrilled over the Mac trade because I felt like it was a paradigm shifting moment for me.
Yes.
We've never seen that with Tom. And that opened up this whole like, oh my gosh, is Tom growing? Like, what else could he go and do now? Might he trade back in this draft? Who knows? Like, it's a whole new Tom that we've never seen before. And it's a move, Tyler, that I'm still grading positively this year, but I hope he puts that arrow in his quiver and remembers it next year, because in following years, those are the moves we need to do to retain our compensatory picks. Go and trade for guys in the offseason. Right now, it doesn't make as much sense just from a compensatory pick standpoint. Obviously, bringing Mac makes sense any day of the week. But in terms of how it affected our compensatory picks, this isn't the year to be trading just for that purpose. But I mean, what it can do for Bosa and our defense is outstanding,
Yeah. No, I hope that, you look at the 2 teams you talked about previously, the Patriots, the Rams. At this point, they have a system in place. They're very stable. Obviously, Belichick's been there for a long time, 6 years now with Snead and McVay. I'm hoping the Chargers, because they, like Tom Telesco has always had to do this weird, I'm not trying to give him, credit or not credit, give him an excuse or anything, but it was always this weird juggling of, do we work with Rivers? Do we go all in? Do we move on? Now it just feels like they're able to obviously move forward and have this long-term vision. And I hope that there's at least stability, even if Staley's the one calling the shots, and even if we don't like everything Telesco's doing, I hope there's at least some stability where they can really address problems like this and look maybe much further ahead than they were able to before.
No, totally. I mean, let's be real. We had a quarterback that we probably could have built a championship window around, and we dropped the ball. We really didn't. And then we got extremely lucky that somehow in a year that Tom Telesco didn't fall in love with a player and trade up for him, we had the best quarterback, our hope and savior, Justin Herbert, fall in our laps. So, I mean, we're sitting really pretty. And part of Bill's model is recognizing that. It's a little different. Where Bill with the Patriots and the Rams differ is that Bill recognized he had a quarterback that's going to elevate the play of everyone around him. So we don't need to be as aggressive in free agency or in other areas as the Rams are. The Rams are very big on trading away their firsts to bring in that talent that's going to be the tide that rises all boats, or
Mm-hmm.
to just bring in somebody like Vaughn or Odell that, if Odell didn't get hurt, he would have easily netted them a good pick. He's going to,
Oh yeah.
a healthy Odell after that performance was going to sign for decent money. And so their models diverge in that sense. We should be following Bill's model because we have a quarterback that is absolutely going to elevate the play of the offensive line, the receivers, the tight ends, maybe even the running backs. So we need to capitalize on that while we can.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you that. So that's awesome.
Yeah. So this year's opportunity, where does this take us? What I previously didn't mention is you're not penalized in the years where you have this big imbalance of players being brought in as players that have left. So what I mean by that is last year when the Patriots brought in, I think it was like they brought in 8 compensatory free agents last year, when previously they hadn't brought in, I think they only brought in 7 over a 5-year period, which is nuts, like going that much larger in 1 year.
Right.
But it's because the league doesn't balance it out and say, well, you brought in 8, you only lost 1 or 2. So we're going to go ahead and hold the next 6 signings or players that leave in the next 3 years. We're going to take away picks from that allotment. It doesn't work like that. When you're running a net negative, it just washes every year. So this whole strategy is built around recognizing we're already not going to get a compensatory pick. So let's go ahead and push all of our chips in this year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's I've connected the dots at this point. So thank you for clarifying that too as well.
Yeah, and there's also this model that some people think it makes sense where you let some cash roll over to next year. But if we're talking about a player that could be brought in to fill a starting level or even like high rotational role, and could potentially, you bring him in for 1 year and he could give you a cheap 4-year, compensatory contract down the road. I think that is a much bigger value proposition than rolling over an extra $9 million in salary cap to next year. That's going to lose value by about 14% as the cap rises. $9 million now isn't the same as $9 million next year. So
yeah,
spending it before the cap inflates makes sense to me.
I did have a question about that last sentence on here, but I think you're going to sort of address that with the upcoming free agents and whatnot. So I'll let you do your thing.
If we have targets?
If we have targets, and then just how that. So you're saying, just for the listeners, not the viewers, if it says the sentence is, if we commit this year and sign a few more free agents, we can set up approximately 3 to 4 years of outgoing CFA surpluses. So I definitely wanted you to expand on that, but I think you are.
Yeah, that is the rest of the presentation.
Perfect.
Yeah. So here's our current cancellation chart. We're already in an area where we're not going to get anything back, right? I think we can all agree on that. As you can see, Nuosu, Jones, White, they've all signed for, and those are their over the cap, their estimated picks that they should be getting because of those contracts. Here are incoming free agents. We have more outgoing guys, but they're just not going to sign for the kind of contracts that are going to wipe out this other money.
Right.
Where it gets confusing, Tyler, and I don't have an answer for everybody, is it's a little unclear if, you see this incoming free agent for 16.5. Would that wipe out multiple people that
exact question? Yeah.
Yeah. It's a little confusing. It normally over the cap just has, most expensive get crossed out. And then they kind of guess and check for the guys that sign in between the, filling in, leaving spots for White. When White was projected to be 8 to 10 million, he was, at the top along with Nuosu, and they were leaving him there until he signed. And then he went to 3 and it was okay, let's drop him down low now. Yikes. Whole other show there for you. But so I would think that's why I don't think, even if Linville, Chris, Jared all signed tomorrow, even for $2 million each, I think Everett would just wipe them out in general. I think you would look at how much was brought in money wise, and it just doesn't compare. We're already gone. So does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I was looking at, because it's obviously not a 1-for-1, 16.5. It's not 9.5. So I was definitely going to ask, how does that work into each other? But I guess it makes sense, but it's obviously not there's no rhyme or reason. It just makes sense. But
and that's why it's confusing. It never, That's why they're projected picks the year before. Like we were talking about, we were projected to have some of those sevenths be sixth. And then it adjusts as we go, as players' performance actually does trick into it a little bit,
right?
But it's heavily weighted towards the contract.
So sometimes there are, when you're talking about compensatory picks, it's very far in advance. They say, okay, these are the projected comp picks that they're going to get.
Yes.
And I believe, was it Rayshon Jenkins? Somebody this year, I thought they were going to get, I think there was talks early on, they were getting an extra fourth for this player. I don't recall who it was. It ended up being that extra sixth. What is the wiggle room? Why is there wiggle room? Why is it not just like so cut and dry from the start?
Yeah. Well, Tyrod Taylor's a great example too, right? Like I think that's somebody that was projected to get us a 6 based on how much money he was expected to earn last year. But a lot of that was in incentives. And those incentives were tied to playing time. Mills came in and started over him. There's also a percentage of snaps that actually, doesn't just affect the money, but is actually AirPod down, is actually in the compensatory pick formula itself. So if it's something like 75% and 50, I forget exactly what the numbers are, but if you have a contract that is incentive laden, you might be docked twice on the compensatory pick model, both in the money that you received, which goes into the formula, and in the compensatory formulas, snaps played.
Gotcha.
So
yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so basically what we're looking at here, again, sorry for the listeners, it does help to watch. We're basically not getting any comp picks next year. There's almost no chance we're getting comp picks next year. So we should just sign a bunch of players this year, like Belichick did last season, because we're not getting comp picks next year anyway, so it doesn't matter. So go all in. I mean, I know Chargers fans are for that, but it's also not seeing another reason why we should go all in like this.
Yeah, and this is all getting back to going all in, but in that, and having people believing that a lot of times that means you're leveraging or mortgaging your future. And I think it's the exact opposite. You're actually going to get a return on your investment if you go all in now. So moves that should be made today: find 4 starting positions that need an upgrade, identify 4 players that have upside in a new environment, and ensure the target's contract expires while they are young enough. This is the big thing to retain value on the open market. Don't sign a player that is going to be, making an exorbitant amount of money in the last year of their contract when they're older, and you're either going to cut them or you're not going to be able to trade them, because even when their dead cap is taken into account, no team's going to want that contract. And if you do let them finish the contract, they need to be old enough or young enough, I should say, to resign somewhere and retain value.
Yeah, so the Chargers depends. They're likely not going to, certainly not a second round pick, but they're not really going to get anything back later on for the Khalil Mack trade, because he's probably going to do his 3 years, and then maybe he's got 1 year, 2 years, but certainly not the second rounder.
Yeah,
and hopefully can't get a second rounder.
Hopefully they don't release him, in the 3rd year, because his cap is low. That would kill me. He might get something. I mean, he's 31 right now, right? Von Miller's 34.
Is he really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's 34. Is he 34 or 30? He's older. He's at least 3 years older than Mac. So could Mac sign if he stays healthy? And if Bosa and him team up and ball out, who knows, man? Sky's the limit.
Yeah. And then, just when we're talking about the Von Miller trade, it's a 6-year contract, but it's really like a 3-year contract, whatever. When you're addressing the comp picks and you're trying to do the comp pick formula and all that, it's about what he signed for it's just like looking at it as a 6-year, 20 mil APY sort of contract. It's not like, what he ends up making. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it's so they don't go back and retroactively take away picks or balance it out if a player gets cut down the road. And it is what their average per year is, with adjustments made at the end of the first year. If it was like a 1-year contract or 2-year contract that was heavily affected by incentives.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Do void years play any role in this?
So if a player voids out, they are out, it's not considered them being cut, is my understanding. They can still go out and get you a comp pick. And that's just factored. That's a good question if they would, because that could affect the average per year, right? Exactly. If they sign for 2 years. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Kaiser White has 4 void years on his 1-year deal or whatever. So I was just curious is it the average over those with the 4 years, or is it just the one?
So what I've seen is he is measured at 1 year. So that might be our answer, is they do not count. They count the effective years.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I have no idea what void. I don't know.
So getting into our targets right now, I have a sheet. I'm stoked because I really like Daniel Popper and The Athletic, and our sheet kind of matches up with what he's measured our spending power at. So that was like a good job, Kyle, moment for me. But so we have 9.4 million that we can spend. And what's important when looking at that is you might look at that and say, okay, well, let's say we re-sign Oday Abushi and to 1.5 mil. Do we take that down to almost 8 million in cap left? No, that would be closer to 8.7, because Oday would push out a player making 750,000 and is 1.5. So when we're talking about spending power, that's why I don't call it cap space. I call it spending power, because you have to just have a little reminder that, there is going to be like a $750,000 in savings in that first cap hit as it affects our cap space. So these are the guys that right now I would pick up. Previously, I had Cornelius Lucas, and I did have Kaiser White on here. I had Cornelius Lucas because I really was high on him. But it is what it is. Those guys have gone elsewhere. Right now, I bring in these 4 guys. They would fill starter / like D'Ernest. I consider RB1B another starter. Essentially, I think he would get borderline starter reps, even with him and Eckler on the field at the same time. Quessenberry would slide in as our right tackle. Oday Abushi would be Oday Abushi would be our right guard, and Matthew would be a starter. Another article I wrote, Tyler, is on what I believe is the one area in our run defense. What I think was the worst part of our run defense, I'm not convinced it was our defensive line last year. And I watched the Raiders game and kind of validated that a little bit, or found some discoveries. When we ran like our tight front formula or tight front formation, we were actually netting negative 0.2 yards allowed to Josh Jacobs. It was when we were lined up in our nickel formation against their 12-man personnel with 2 tight ends on the field, typically what you run your base defense in. We left our nickel in, and they just kept running to Chris Harris's side. And Chris Harris was in that star position where he needs to be both because he's so close to the box, a run defender and a pass defender. They kept running to his side, and when they were in that formation, they were giving up over 8 yards carry. So I'm really a fan of bringing in another safety, whether it's through the draft or in free agency, that could allow Derwin to be our guy that's at the star, or even Nasir does a good job in that role. But we need somebody that's going to actually engage a blocker, which Chris Harris was amazing at backpedaling 10 yards away from their tight end, their guard, whoever came his way. So these are the guys that I would sign. I break down cap hits later. We could also re-sign Derwin. I think he would free up about 3.3. I just went with the spot track valuation, but there's a chance he might try to, make more than Adams per year, which was 17 million per year. And this is 15.5. That's neither here nor there. That'll all wash out in how they negotiate everything. Oh, sorry. Anything you want to talk about on here?
Yeah, I hate to throw a monkey wrench in it, but D'Ernest Johnson signed the tender with the Cleveland Browns. So they played
so that doesn't prohibit us from signing him, since it's a restricted free agent tender, right?
Okay, then explain that to me.
So D'Ernest Johnson was given a restricted free agent tender because he hasn't gotten through his full, I think it's 3 or 4 years before they can become an unrestricted free agent. And the Browns, the reason why I have him penciled in at 3.5 million a year is because they signed him to a right of refusal tender. There's multiple tenders that they could sign him to. And they signed him to the lowest one, which was only 2.5 million. If they were committed to bringing him back, they would have signed. They could have gotten a second round pick if somebody were to re-sign him by putting the second round tender on him, which was about 3.98 million per year.
Okay.
So that tells me that, the right of refusal only gives them the right to match any contract that's given to him. They don't gain anything if he leaves. So if they were to offer him a 3.5, or even in the other one I wrote, I did 1 year, 4 million. I think I don't think they would follow up to 4, maybe not even 3.5, because they've already shown that they didn't think another team might do that and potentially could have gotten a 3 second-round pick by another team doing so. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just say like, oh, he got tendered. I guess we have to trade for him. But I see it's gotcha. I'm on the same page now.
And that's my own research. That's if I'm wrong there, somebody in the comments blast me. I'm all for it. That just teaches me, and I'm still learning all this stuff too. But in all my research, that's been pretty consistently what I've seen. So I believe that to be the case.
Nice. Thank you for clarifying.
No worries. No worries. So this is our roster as it stands right now. So I have this little chart in the upper left. That's how I'm measuring our, So those picks, the way our current roster is situated, I have notes for this. If you look at over the cap right now, we have 8.7 in cap space for next year. Mm-hmm. So my chart to the upper left is actually showing before we go and sign these guys that I want to sign. If you factor in over the cap has 8.7 in space, only 29 players signed. If I fill the rest of that roster with players at their minimum, at the rookie minimum contract, we're already at negative 8 million. Oh, and our draft pool, I put about 3 million in net overage from rookies signing as well. We're already at a negative 8 million in cap space. So this would set us up if we were to restructure Lindsley, restructure Bosa. I think that's why you haven't seen these moves made this year, because we're already okay enough right now to make the moves we want to make. But we're going to have to restructure Lindsley, Bosa, Allen, somebody to open up space next year to be able to get out of this $8 million hole we're in right now.
Yeah. Were you surprised then that they restructured Khalil Mack of all options?
Yeah, it's a really good question. But yeah, I was very surprised when you have it shows that they're committed to him for at least 2 years and hopefully 3, because he had no guaranteed money. So he made the most sense in that way. But when you restructure somebody, you're going to basically spread your savings in that year across the rest of their contract. And his cap was already, I wouldn't say high. If he comes back and dominates or just is 90% of who he is, cap it makes sense all day. But if he does have some more injuries and stuff like that, it might start looking like a little bit of the taller cap hit. Somebody like Lindsley, save 6 million next year. In the next 2 years, he makes an extra 3. He still doesn't go over 20 million. And I'm of the mindset that your center is one of the most important positions on the offensive line. I think it's more important than left tackle personally. For him to be making, I mean, Tyler, you're a Charger fan. And you have been for some time. I'm sure you were sick the year that Phillip Rivers was having to lean over. I think it was, who was it? Was it Pulley? Where he was having to lean over and make the offensive line blocking adjustments and calls. And then going through his cadence, you're like, I can't imagine what he was going through there. So I think Lindsley would still be worth it. Davis is likely to get cut or traded next year. Hopefully he does well and we can trade him. Maybe there's an opportunity to restructure him or do something different, but they're going to need to save money somewhere, and he's just the lowest hanging fruit. I kind of tailor this to try to keep Allen too, because I'm a homer, but
and he said as much, like he's going to stick around. But Davis is definitely the interesting one. They have a lot of flexibility there. Of the 3 you have here, Lindsey restructure, Bosa restructure, or Davis being trade/cut, which one do you feel like is the most likely they're going to go for? Is that Davis, like the low-hanging fruit, like you said?
Bosa they're most committed to, right? And to just restructure him would make sense in next year, because I believe that's his biggest cap hit. So I think Bosa is the most obvious because they have the most to gain, right? It frees up 15 million. They're fully committed to him. He already, I don't remember if he already has a void year or not, but he's somebody that I could see them say, like, getting outside their comfort zone, because they don't normally use void years, and being like, we want him around. Let's tack on a year or 2. But at this point, I'd say probably Bosa.
Okay, good to know.
So then we get to the right side of this chart, and our adjusted spending power adjusts for those 4 players that I previously discussed being signed into, so they already played out this year. This would be their cap hits for the following year. Obviously, O'Day and Matthew are walking now, but we do still have Quessenberry and Johnson locked into the roster now. So we're only going to have, even with these adjustments made and those other free agents signed, Johnson's cap hit would be $4 million. Questenberry's would be $2 million in this year. So still not bad from those guys. But if you look at our adjusted spending power and the guys we have leaving, we have an opportunity here to earn between 2 or 4 picks. I'm assuming we're not going to bring in that many players in free agency. I hope we don't. I don't think we need to. I think if we were to be smart and use the Patriots model and trade for some guys, there's certainly opportunity to not bring in next to no compensatory free agents. And, let's say we re-sign somebody like Nasir, because I do see him as kind of a foundational guy in this defense. Maybe Drew, maybe Donald, but just by letting somebody like Guyton, Tillery, O'Day, and Matthew walk, you might be looking at 2 fifths, 2/6, which I think is a huge gain in building this roster and preparing for when we have to re-sign this amazing quarterback to a $50 million contract. We're going to need cheap talent, to fill this depth. Anybody on that list that you think we might try to retain? And Tyler, forgive me for the values that I'm estimating. Guyton is a shot in the dark. I'm just thinking if he has a great season and develops into the kind of guy that we want him to, and Herbert's slinging it, maybe he can net $8 million. I mean, after Christian Kirk got almost $20 million, I think anything, or 19 million with up to 21 million a year. I think anything is possible, but we'll see.
I would love to assume that, some of these guys all develop and they're great and they're retained and all that. But then you look at the history of Telesco actually retaining their guys, and it's like Keenan Allen, Denzel Perryman for 1 year.
Yeah.
Almost it. And obviously the first rounders. So like Adderley, I think, is a big part of the team, of course. Could just as easily watch him walk. Pickens, who knows? Tranquil. We just saw what they did with Kaiser White. Wouldn't surprise me if Tranquil's gone. Yeah. Tillery is definitely the interesting one because they've never exercised. They've never not exercised a 5th-year option on a first rounder, I think, so far. Tillery, I don't know. Like, he's a guy that's going to play 90% of the snaps, and they're just going to let him go. So I think, but we'll see.
Hopefully we keep Parham. I like Parham.
I agree. Yeah, Parham would be fantastic. I don't know how it works out with Everett. I don't know if Everett even has like much of an out next year. I think they're keeping him for 2 years.
So that is next. Yes, you're right. He is here for 2 years. He does have an out for next year cap wise, but I just really hope they don't, because he could be one of the guys that gets us the most next year. Next year on the slide in 2024.
Yeah, because he'll be 28, 29 when he signs that 4th contract, second meaningful contract, I guess. So, yeah, that'd be awesome.
And Herbie's going to get him 10 touchdowns a year, man.
Oh, yeah.
Hoping for big things there. So, I didn't say this before, but this year, if we signed those players, we would still have that I projected to the contracts I projected, which, again, might be homerish. Maybe Matthew needs another $1 million or $2 million. I tried to do my best to go off of what their values were, but I did also remake this. Cornelius Lucas, and I also had Will Hernandez in there. That was the other guy. I really wish we had gone after him. He's an example of a guy that never had solid center play, only had 1 year of a semi-decent left tackle that was drafted in the 2nd round. If you suddenly sandwich him behind Slater and Lindsley, I think the sky's the limit for him. And I'm not saying it's somebody that we commit to for 4 years. I'm saying a guy we bring in for what the Cardinals signed him, $1.1 million, as a 4-year starter, surrounded by 2 Pro Bowlers, All Pros. I don't think Lindsley made All Pro last year, right? But Slater got 2nd team. Yeah. I think there's a huge chance somebody like Will Hernandez or even O'Day Abushi, if he stays healthy and has a full season of playing well, goes and signs a good contract. But Will was so young, he could have really cashed in if he had an exceptional year.
Okay, so you already said this in your presentation. You're looking for guys who are also young enough to cash in a big way following. Yeah, I like that.
They have the greatest opportunity to really exceed in the upper rounds, right? But even if we bring in a guy like Matthew, you bring in Matthew for a year, and then he goes and signs for 1 year somewhere else, for almost the same as what he signs for us. That's an 5th round pick in 2 years that we would gain, along with a guy that could free up Derwin James to dominate in the box around the line of scrimmage. No brainer to me.
Yeah. Just shot in the dark. I don't even know if you would have tracked this. Does Bill Belichick, because it almost seems like he does he target almost intentionally former first rounders because of that first round bias, because those guys are more likely to probably get more on the free agent market just because of that bias? Do you know if he's happened to maybe target
Great question.
those kind of guys? I always feel like I'm like, oh my gosh, that former guy went to the Patriots again, and he's a former this or that. And
I don't know. I think Bill's got a hubris about him. So I think there's also a part of him that wants to like turn just these guys that failed on other teams, right? And and other guys that are just that no one else knows about, like Trent Brown. Like I don't remember what he signed for or what he where he was drafted, but just takes any move that makes other people look dumb and lets Bill sit at his computer and laugh. I think he loves doing. But in terms of like real research into it, Tyler, I don't really have anything.
Yeah, all good. I total shot in the dark. I was just curious.
So let's go to 2024. So we've already gained, from the last year. I'm guessing in doing this, we might gain 1 or 2 fifths, 1 or 2 sixths. And if we get 1 fifth, 1 sixth, 2 sevenths, like we're well within the range of getting 4 picks pretty easily if we make these 2 signings. But if you look, Tyler, our biggest gains could potentially come from the 2 guys we signed to 1-year deals now. So that's why we need to make this move and push our chips in now, because we have the most to gain from the players we signed in the next 2 to 3 weeks, in my mind. So getting to the next season, I didn't adjust this I didn't play with this year's cap space at all, because other than Michael Davis's dead money being added onto it, but 2024's roster and compensatory free agents, our cap right now is at 28 million. I'm estimating 14% growth until we're shown otherwise, because they capped the growth this year. We actually had overages, which will be put on to next year. So until it stops growing at 14%, I'm leaving it as such.
Okay.
That 28 million doesn't account for if Nasir is extended, if Herbie's extended. So we are already pressed up against that budget. 2 to 4 extra picks by allowing David Quessenberry and Dearness Johnson to sign now and walk later for more money. I absolutely think Johnson's a guy that could blow up and, get that one good running back contract, and I want him to do that after he's played for us and goes and get us a 5th round pick. Quessenberry, I think after, he would still be 33. That's easy for me to remember because I went to school with David and I'm 31. Nice. So yeah, I played freshman football with the guy. He played, I didn't play, but he played. Him signing for $7 million a year, I think is doable if he comes on a team that's led by a Justin Herbert. We also have, Filer, Eckler, Everett. Obviously, I want a good amount of these guys retained, but I think it's very attainable to get, a couple fifths, a couple sixths again, and who knows if any of these guys pop off and get us a 3rd, or somebody that we go and trade for a year prior to fill a spot, because that is part of the exercise as well. So getting back to last year and this year as well, in years that we wouldn't be spending on compensatory free agents, right? Because that's part of this whole strategy is I'm telling Tom, hey, you got to pump the brakes on free agency, and in later years, go all in now for what you want to spend in the next couple of years, and then let this talent slowly leave and then bring in new guys by trading and by drafting. So you might look at that last year where I showed we only have 7 million in spending power and say, Kyle, that's not enough. Like, how would we make any moves? Well,
right.
This last year, I can name the teams that spent less than 7.3 million in compensatory free agents. And a lot of them didn't spend anything. Colts, Patriots, Titans, Cowboys, Commanders, Packers, Vikings, Saints, Bucks, Cardinals, Rams. Probably another team because I have the 49ers on there twice. But there's a lot of teams that haven't spent money on these compensatory free agents. So the model's there. You heard some of the teams: Colts, Patriots, Bucks, teams with great rosters that don't need to go out into the free agency and spend the way we have in the past. And by doing so, again, like I said, 2 to 4 picks extra here, which would be exceptional. Where we land. Oh, sorry, Tyler, go ahead.
Oh no, I would love for them to, obviously, once Herbert's contract is a significantly higher contract than it is now, would love for them to be able to do, work those out where the comp picks are coming in right around that time. So
Yeah,
yeah.
we'd be looking at. I think 2025, or really 2025, might be where his contract, his extension has been signed, but we haven't seen that ramp up, right? I think Mahomes ramped up in year like 7. Before that, he was at like 7 mil, 10 mil, or something like that. Then all of a sudden, you get to that,
Yeah.
huge acceleration. In doing this, I think that acceleration would take place for Herbert in 25 or 26. And even if it is 25, hopefully we have 6 to 8 guys drafted in decent rounds. Think about the guys that Tom's drafted in rounds, 4 or 5 or even 6. They're depth guys, or they're rotational guys that make an impact. And I think having those guys at next to nothing, next to the vet minimum, would absolutely bolster the roster, like you just said. So where we land in 25, we maxed out in 22. In doing so, we added 4 starting level players, 2 left in 23, 2 left in 24. And in doing so, we gained these extra picks without mortgaging our future. So if we go back to the Parker trade, and now that we've learned what this compensatory formula is, and hopefully, your viewers, Tyler, have a better understanding of it if they didn't already. And we're tracking with this new information how Bill Belichick fleeced the Dolphins. Sorry for Dolphins fans. Don't know why you're watching us, but these are our secrets. They're not for you. But we have so the Patriots trade a 3rd round in 2023 and gain a 5th round in 2022 in Devontae Parker. Myers and Aguilar are in their contract years. So Bill already knows and sees this, and he knows if I gain a starter right now, I can let one or both of those guys walk. Let's just say, for argument's sake, it's Myers. But you also have Aguilar, who signed for over $10 million to the Patriots, which was an overpay in my mind. But again, Kirk's getting $21 million a year potentially, so who knows?
Yes.
But let's just say Myers leaves and signs next year for $10 million a year, maybe 10 to 12. His 2021 over the cap valuation was 10 million, so I think 10 to 12 mil per year is doable. And I'm basing these numbers, Tyler, off of when I'm like projecting what their contracts and compensation might be. I'm using today's numbers because it gets too complicated if we try to weigh out what it's going to be with, the rising cap. But so let's say he signs for what today would be considered 10 to 12 million. Bill is going to save that 6th round pick I told you he earned from that center leaving, instead of losing that if he went and signed a starting wide receiver. So in essence, this has contributed to him not gaining, but retaining that 6th round pick he's going to get next year. Myers leaves for 10 million. In 2024, he's going to get a 4th rounder by letting Myers or Aguilar walk. If he lets them both walk, maybe he gets a 4th and a 5th. And then Parker, after starting for 2 years in the Patriots organization, probably going to do pretty darn well. Never going to win a Super Bowl because we're going to kick their butt in the playoffs. But hopefully, he does well as their number 1 receiver, and he signs for 12 to 14 million a year. I know you said you haven't really watched too much of Parker. I've always loved Devontae Parker as a player. I think he's got a lot of talent. He's just had lesser quarterbacks.
Miami,
Miami. He had a coach getting paid to lose. I mean, how cool is that? So he has really good, I feel like, awareness and hands. I think he's the kind of guy that excels in the Patriots system. So it might be a little homerish of me to say that, even though he's not my guy. But we'll see. I think he's going to do well. This is representing what I believe the Patriots could likely be netting from that one trade. So what do you think, Tyler, about how that trade grades out, reflecting on that?
Obviously, if everything works out and everything goes great and he doesn't tear his ACL in week 1 and all that good stuff, the process, even if the result maybe doesn't work out the way you want, the process of setting yourself up like this is it's incredible. It looks like a foreign language to me, not because I don't. I can read it and I get it, but we've never experienced this. Like it's just immersing yourself in this and looking at it this way, not just looking at 2023 comp picks for me, but 2024, 2025, and the ripple effect of everything. this is awesome. And for the Patriots to do this on a routine basis and get the, what was it, 42 comp picks over the 20 something years routinely like this, and have that plan extrapolated over 2-3 years, it's phenomenal. It's, I mean, again, why I wanted to bring you on, because this is so fascinating, but it's something that I know so little about because there's no familiarity. I don't have to talk
Tyler,
about this ever.
Open letter it to Tom, man. Please use your connections, man. Get it out there. Gosh, I wish you would.
Yeah, no, it's then I guess I don't know how much you have more left to present, but I do have, I guess maybe the most important question is, it looks like the Chargers have at least worked out some comp picks this season, and maybe more recently. It seems kind of more coincidence than them actually doing it.
Yeah.
Do you think that the Los Angeles Chargers and Tom Telesco and Brandon Staley will embrace more of this moving forward with Herbert, with the contract, with the way they've been approaching different things? Do you think the Chargers will actually make a change, or do you think it's going to be kind of the same old, same old?
I think this offseason is going to tell us, to be honest with you. I think we're at a very big turning point where old Tom, that is a little bit conservative sometimes with the cap that we go out and spend. Like, he normally does a pretty good job, but he's also content with having a rollover. Like I said, I don't see the value in that money rolling over. We have some holes that we need to fill right now. And I'm of the mindset, Tyler, for like, why would we draft a right tackle with, like, why would we leave ourselves in a position where we have to draft a right tackle?
I'm right there with you.
when there's players out there that not only could we sign, but we could sign and then get something for them next year or in 2 years. So that doesn't really make sense to me. If we have an off season that would remind me of last year, where we had a very exciting first week, Lindsley, Filer, O'Day was pretty quick in getting signed. Like, we made a splash, man. And then we were kind of going through the off season and wondering, okay, like, we could really use another safety. Like, we need some safety depth. We could use another cornerback maybe. And there were guys out there. I was a big Malik Hooker fan. And I know he might not have done great, but again, it was that same mindset of, why not just give that guy a flyer, a prove it deal, and bring in some talent? Even if we were to draft a Penning or somebody to play that right tackle spot, kind of like we talked about. Well, now you've prevented yourself from picking your BPA potentially, and you're going to develop the guy in our championship window, and you're going to prevent yourself from getting a compensatory pick in 2 years. I see nothing wrong. Even if they do decide Penning's our BPA, we want Penning. Great. David's a good guy. Let David and Penning hang out for 2 years. Let David Quessenberry be on that right tackle spot, and let Penning develop underneath him for a year, and then David can go. Like, it's those kind of picks that I hope we start making, or it's these type of pickups that I hope we start making. And like I said, if Tom sees next year as something he needs to roll money over for and doesn't make these moves, then I think it kind of shows us that maybe he's not there and really wanting to utilize this plan. Yeah. And the next slide is just how we could maximize it moving forward. And it's a quick summary. Only dip in the compensatory free agent waters when you're ready to go all in. So next year, don't. Year after that, don't. Focus on filling starter depth holes for players can be utilized and whose value you can increase. Refrain from designing contracts for our players that encourages you to cut them in the final years of their contract. And for players already in this situation, like a Davis, trade them before they lose their value. I hope they do something with Keenan where we don't. If we do to Keenan what we did to Casey, I'm going to be crushed. I'm going to be really bummed, because he's a guy that, if they're not committed to him now, then maybe those Packers rumors aren't the worst thing in the world. But personally, I'd love to see him restructure and stay. But if your plan is when his cap hit reaches $24 million and he's only 2.7 against the cap, and for you to cut him, we're going to have a problem. And lastly, don't be afraid to admit that a Pipkins is underperformed and seek that replacement before, everyone else in the world knows. I think Pipkins, like, I broke down on film, my most recent article was on how he actually did in those games that we thought he did well. And it's still abysmal to me. It's bad. He was playing against the best competition he really had was Malik Reed, who was,
Mhm.
a low 50s PFF score. And
Yeah.
there's still countless moments where you just see him getting overpowered constantly. I think there's a better chance he nets us like a low 7th if we keep him as like a rotational swing guy, and maybe somebody thinks, oh, he had those good starting games a couple of years ago, maybe we'll throw $2 million at him. But I'm not ready to roll him out as a starter. And I think it would prevent us from bringing in somebody like David, who could go out, sign, and net us a decent compensatory pick.
Yeah, there are plenty of right tackle options that are out there that are better than what I think they're actually going to end up doing. One of them being Penning, one of them being Pipkins, for other reasons too, like obviously the comp picks and all the other sort of stuff. But I don't know. Well, again, we'll see. Like you said, this offseason will really tell us quite a bit about whether they've embraced sort of this model or some sort of hybrid or something.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. And that is it. That's the show, man. That is the presentation.
All right, Kyle, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you coming on and just breaking everything down. I love to see all of this broken down in such a way that we can all understand. And I think it just makes Chargers fans smarter, more knowledgeable and all that, because we don't know any of this. I didn't know any of this before you sent it to me. I just knew comp picks were a thing we could get the following year, but you breaking it down in a full timeline is fantastic. And thanks to the Bolts in the Blue community for letting you post this and share this and feature this. So where can we find your work moving forward? Can we follow you on Twitter? Did you make this Twitter account? Like, where can we find you?
On the spot, yeah. Now that again, special thanks to Bolts from the Blue. The membership on there has been very supportive. Like, I'm just doing this as a fan that likes writing and covering this stuff. But yeah, so my posts are all featured on there. And I did create this Twitter handle just recently. So it's like no followers right now, but I hope to be kind of continuing to make articles like this and scouting reports and other stuff. And even though Bolts from the Blue is going to have it hosted on their fan page section, but I'll be posting links on the Twitter. So on my Twitter account. So as you guys, if you want to come on, follow it. I'll keep updating compensatory pick style stuff, give out a lot of other content. Right now I have, a diagnostic on our run defense and why I think the most detrimental part of our run defense last year still hasn't been addressed. We still have a giant hole there. Got a couple draft profiles and some other content. So it'll all be posted on the Twitter and on my Twitter handle. That's how new to Twitter I am. I still am calling it the Twitter apparently. So that is terrible. But I really appreciate, Tyler, you having me on, you taking the time to read that article because it's a bear. I know it's a long deal, but I will have that article posted on my Twitter account as well. So if anyone wants to follow along, they can. And I have the sheet that I use to calculate all of our numbers linked in that article. So if anyone wants to pull that up and make a copy so they can play with their own stuff, they can as well.
No, that's fantastic. I'll be linking the article in the video description and the description of the podcast and all that. So you'll definitely be able to find it, but definitely follow him at Bolt Breaker Box on Twitter. If he keeps Bolt Breaker Box as his Twitter handle, hopefully it stays the same. Thank you so much for joining me, man. I can't wait to see what you do next. And I hope everybody else in the Chargers community follows along too, because this is fantastic. And you obviously know what you're talking about. You put in the work, very professional. I really appreciate all of this. I loved this.
Awesome, Tyler. Thank you so much, man. This is like a dream come true for me too. I get to sit down and talk to somebody that's, influential in the community about Chargers. So anytime we can do this again, man, I'm always here for you.
I will definitely have you on again for sure. Absolutely.
Awesome.
All right, guys, take care.